right now on Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Higher Journeys. And of course, if it is your first time here, I welcome you. My name is Alexis Brooks. I am your host, and I'm joined today by two, I would say, illustrious researchers, and I can call two good friends, and that is none other than Brad Olsen and Laura Eisenhower. Welcome to the both of you. Thanks so much for joining us fairly last moment.
Fairly last moment, but breaking news and an important subject we're going to be talking about today.
Absolutely. Laura, I wish you had been out at Contact in the Desert with Brad and myself and a whole crew of family that we hadn't seen for about 4 years. We missed you.
I missed you guys too, but it's great to be here. And yeah, maybe next year.
Yeah, maybe next year. And there's a lot going on in between, and there's a lot to talk about. That's what we're here to do today. So let's get into it, guys. No doubt, you know, at this point, we're about a week and a day in to the quote unquote bombshell report, whistleblower report from a Mr. David Charles Grusch, 36 years old, former combat officer in Afghanistan, and part of a very, very coveted UAP task force, former intelligence, who has come forward with what would be considered the bombshell, but with a lot of questions. We won't go into the story. I'll put a link. You've no doubt probably seen it at this point. He gave a very, very detailed article to well-known writers, Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, to the debrief. Now, you may remember those names back in 2017 were the breaking news at the time, and happened with the New York Times. And several things have happened since that time. So we're going to dig into this, you guys. We're going to talk. We've had this discussion for a week now. It's a week old or so, parsed every which way, which is a good thing. This is what we want to do, you guys, is really kind of go into not so much the nuts and bolts, the mechanistic aspect of this. There's some great interviews out there, some great conversations happening when it comes to digging into the national security aspect of this, the whistleblower aspect of this, the politicizing of this. There's no shortage of that. But what we're going to talk about with both Brad and Laura today has to do with the motivation. That's also coming up, and for good reason. The motivation, why now? We're going to talk about a couple of other events that have happened concurrently with this latest whistleblower report. So without further ado, Brad, why don't you just go ahead and jump in? I know you and I spoke a few days ago when I said, you got to do this. You got to come on with me. We got to talk about this. I'm going to start with you, author of Beyond Esoterica and Beyond. You address some aspects of what we may be seeing here. I'm going to have you dig right into what your thoughts are.
Well, this was really big news a little over a week ago when Alexa and I were both speakers at Contact in the Desert. They actually interrupted one of the panels to break the news. And that was this story that came over about David Grusch. He was a military guy, but was assigned to work on the crash retrievals and also backward engineering. He has credentials that prove he is who he is. And so when he made these allegations that the government was very interested in crash retrievals for the sole purpose of backward engineering these craft, which means they break them apart, they look at them, they try to reassemble them or reproduce the objects themselves into our own form. And I have a whole chapter on backward engineering in my book, Future Esoteric. So I'm very familiar with the idea of recovering craft and using them to further our science to find out how they were doing it. So he not only talked about the craft, but he gave a timeline. He said almost 90 years the U.S. and its allies have been recovering fragments of objects and exotic objects, damaged or intact vehicles, and doing analysis that have provided proof that these were non-human objects. Now, this is a breakthrough statement because it shows that indeed our government has all along been very interested in extraterrestrials and UFOs and everything that got put out about all of us who are doing the research, calling us conspiracy theorists and just promoting some kind of myth is absolutely incorrect. All of us who have been working on this for many years and decades, we're all vindicated right now because this has been going on for 90 years. So the programs he was talking about were dedicated to reverse engineering, that is the studying of properties of an object to determine its inner working for military purposes. And he went on to say that unfortunately, this was the main purpose, that they wanted to use these objects for the sole reason of putting a military application behind them. Not necessarily that they wanted to further our understanding of extraterrestrial races or perhaps bring in people who would be diplomats and announce to the world that we've made contact. No, it was always about using this material to further our military advantage over our adversaries. And so this is really important because now we have the very first truly verified, vetted military person coming out and saying that not only have we recovered these craft and these objects, but alien bodies themselves. So a breakthrough article and very worthwhile to talk about here on your show.
It's a breakthrough story. And again, thank you for that, the fairly comprehensive backdrop in terms of what many of us in the UFO field have known. More on your side, and let's talk about the Richard Dolans and the Linda Moulton Howes. We're going to bring them up a little later in the conversation. Mine, I've said this before, this is not necessarily in my wheelhouse when it comes to the big story, the whole spectrum of the ET UFO phenomenon, but more the experiential. And yet there is no way I can be oblivious to what's happening here and the implications. But again, I really want to go into motivation in terms of the timing and as it relates to two other incidents that happened. Let's bring those up right now, Laura. You actually just brought it up before we went on the air, and that has to do with this very enigmatic, weird, bizarre story in Las Vegas of a family who claims to have witnessed, not just this family, but others witnessed what some describe that looked like a meteor that crashed, made a loud sound. But subsequent to that, this family claimed that they witnessed at the time, shortly after, two alien-ish beings, 8 to 10 feet tall, that fit the description of Grays. Now, what's interesting is this story, the account allegedly happened around April 30th or May 1st, but it just now dropped in terms of the news, picking up momentum. But what I just heard a report, I can't remember if it was Redacted, great YouTube channel, that is saying now that they've gone silent. No, it wasn't Redacted. News Nation, who also interviewed David Grusch, by the way. News Nation, I think it was Ashley Banfield that just did a story today or yesterday, that this family now has gone radio silent. This Las Vegas family that claims to have seen these two bodies. Let's get into that, Laura. Have you been following that case?
I've not been able to follow it as much as I would like to, but so much that I have been able to follow has lighted up a lot of thoughts in me about the timing, about just sort of the whole scenario, because we've heard about these things. Like, for example, Robert Orossi had a UFO crash in his backyard. I don't think that was ever on mainstream news. It might have been. But I mean, these sort of events like Roswell, 1947, there were multiple crashes. That wasn't something that was really put out there. So I feel sometimes when whatever story is on mainstream news is already a story that they're prepared to create a false narrative or a projection on. Like if it made it to all these just Facebook news stories and it's on NBC, ABC, and it's really out there, I feel that they're prepared on some level to present that to the public because they have something else that they're preparing us for that might not be in our best interest. But in light of this, all the experts come forward that they cannot ignore. So when these kind of subjects light up, people are going to be willing to talk. The timing of them being willing to talk, I think, is in the same timing as the possible fake alien invasion, more mainstream disclosure, which is a steered narrative that would be the next wave or next level of this sort of New World Order agenda. I feel that this is a huge catalyzing event to take place because it's pulling out of the woodworks people that would be more expertise on the subject. So yes, they can try and do censorship, but once they let the cat out of the bag, it's going to create curiosity. Why are they all of a sudden silenced now? So I feel like, it's created enough of a storm for the right sort of and a good kind of catalyst, which usually happens when there's like a psyops or a false flag. I'm not saying this is, but if they wanted to steer it into one to then push it into that, we've been in this field for so long, so many numerous individuals, experiencers, and abductees and contactees. I mean, the show X-Files, all the movies. I mean, it's like, unless you're really, really, which a lot of humans are, unfortunately, just completely just steered by everything you see on the news. I mean, this is the opportunity to really start to research. What are these disclosure people been talking about this whole time?
Right.
Now that we see this in front of our face, we're not just going to listen to the news, because there's countless documentaries, there's countless books, and there's countless stories. So I hope that this will ignite a greater awakening than keep people in that sort of blind vision of, okay, whatever the mainstream media chooses to, how they choose to define it or project upon it, that's the only place they're going to look. So I see the timing with, Stephen Greer in Washington, D.C., Contact in the Desert, a very significant time this summer. Just in general, I mean, we go into the astrology, we don't need to, but it's just we're in a critical time.
Agreed.
And I feel like it's going to have its false narrative and projections of this is what it means, to then steer us into something that would be a trap. And then it opens up something for a greater awakening of more attention on the truth coming out of those that individuals that have all the resources that one would want in the face of processing UFO craft and
I love it.
beings.
Laura, I agree with you. I had this brings to mind a quote by oh gosh, I'll just say it. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. You just brought up the paradox of, this dichotomy, or the purpose, or what it may actually ignite, this catalyzing event where one faction may have some motivation, but an awakening, universal significance may also take over. If I can just distill, if I heard you correctly, and that could very well be the case. That's a very good point. I want to read you guys an article that I found as this news broke. I'm talking about the Grusch whistleblower report last Monday, and a lot of us still at Contact, including Linda Moulton Howe, who I just said goodbye to. We're on our way back to the airport, said goodbye, and had a couple of words about it. She said something like, listen, let's see what the next few days bring in terms of the coverage of this. And if, all of the major outlets pick it up and it becomes a true headline, ubiquitous, the dominoes will then fall. So I said, okay, let's take a look. And, I didn't see a lot. I did find one article I want to quote from in the New York Times, but it was an opinion piece by this guy, a longtime contributor named Ross Douthat. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And he wrote an interesting piece where he began by debunking Bob Lazar and his claims. And it had a fair amount of tongue in cheek, it's commentary, right? So he wanted to approach it from that perspective. But I'm going to read something to you that I did take quite seriously in the point he was making. The piece is entitled, and I'll link it below, guys, "Does the U.S. government want you to believe in UFOs?" Here's what he said. He says, this whistleblower, David Grusch, his mere existence is evidence of a fascinating shift in public UFO discourse. There may not be alien spacecraft, but there is clearly now a faction within the national security complex that wants Americans to think there might be alien spacecraft, to give these stories credence rather than dismissal. The evidence for this shift includes the military's newfound willingness to disclose weird atmospheric encounters. It includes the establishment of the task force, UAP task force, that Grusch was assigned to. It includes the government's bizarre behavior, secretive in an attention-grabbing way, around the military shootdowns of what were presumably balloons earlier this year. It also includes other examples of credentialed figures like the Stanford pathology professor Gary Nolan, who claim they're being handed evidence of extraterrestrial contact. I'm going to go on. It's fairly long, but it's important. He says, I have no definite theory of why this push is happening. Maybe it's because there really is something out there and we're being prepared for the big reveal. Or maybe the dose of Pentagon funding that Harry Reid engineered for studying the paranormal back in 2007 allowed a cluster of UFO enthusiasts to infiltrate the defense establishment. Or maybe there's always a deep state network of occult knowledge believers. Think of the Cold War experiments in psychic research, and they've just become more media savvy lately. Sorry, guys, that was long, but he said a lot there. And when I first saw it, I had a bit of a jaundiced eye, like, son of a blah, blah, blah. He's being really tongue in cheek and he's just debunking the whole thing. But he made a good point. There may be some other motivation here in the timing. Brad, what are your thoughts on that?
When we talked about doing this interview, Alexis, it was quite clear to both of us that there is some kind of agenda at hand. Because why, if we've been collecting these down craft for 90 years, at least 75 years since Roswell, that this information is only coming out right now? Why is it that we just had this little drip, 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 drip of disclosure, where now it's turning into a steady stream? And it just seems to me that nothing ever happens by accident, that there's a reason behind everything. And I feel that this is to start preparing the public for a more meaningful contact. Now, this could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing, because we've known about Project Bluebeam as this fake alien invasion since the 1970s, when Werner von Braun, a Nazi scientist that was brought over with Project Paperclip, helped start up NASA. And he said to his assistant, Carol Rosen, who has attended many of these conferences and recounted the story, that on his deathbed, he had a change of heart. And he said he wanted to warn the public of this fake alien invasion. And they would be very high tech about it and using holograms and even real craft shot down, and using so many different techniques, including the media, to portray this as something real, that he had a change of heart on his deathbed and said, look, we got to alert the people about the potential of this Project Bluebeam. And I can't help but think myself that what we're seeing right now are the opening salvos of conditioning the public to see that these aliens have been here, they've been coming around, we've got their craft, we've got recovered bodies, and that it's no longer a conspiracy theory, and that maybe they're going to pull something off like this Project Bluebeam. The targeted date from a CIA whistleblower many years ago, back in the 1980s, 89 in fact, said that 2024 would be the year they do Project Bluebeam. Wow. So it kind of goes along that timeline, that there's this setup to get us used to the fact that aliens are now in the news all of a sudden, where before it was always shunned.
And then we find out that the newscasters are alien hybrids, right? That's the next one.
That's breaking news, guys. Laura said it first. Wow. Well, you bring up in your excellent book, I call it a trilogy, Beyond Esoteric, which I believe is your first in this set, Brad. You do a bit on Project Bluebeam and the whole sort of the wheel, right? And this part of it is just a spoke in that wheel. And you talk about, I have a quote here from you in the book. It says, you say that an ultra secret program called Project Bluebeam represents another false reality, a last-ditch effort for total global control. This program could help to spark a global financial pandemic, an outbreak of war, or even mass suicide. Look what's happened in the last 3 years, and the speculation as to the motivation of what that is, and the fact that, and I'm not going to mention any names, but that aspect of it was just another spoke. Could this be the next? Why weren't we hearing all of these news stories in the midst of those last 3 years? Now it's happening. Could this be part of a comprehensive plan? If you're enjoying this episode, along with all of the subjects that we cover here on Higher Journeys, then I invite you to join our members-only community on Patreon, where we go even deeper into the conversations with the guests that you know and love. Not only does your membership ensure that we can keep this work going and growing, but you'll also get immediate access to our exclusive after shows, Get up close and personal with the guests of the show, along with many other member perks. So click on the link below to join now, or visit higherjourneys.com where you'll find the Patreon link. We'll see you on the journey. Thanks.
Well, that's why I'm a little bit suspicious and even dubious about why this is all coming out right now. And I should just also point out that David Grusch has said that he had permission. You don't come out with information, unless you are authorized to do so. Mm-hmm. This isn't just some rogue DOD officer coming out. No, he even says, I was authorized to talk about it by the DOD's Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review.
That's correct. In April, by the way, not just now. I guess it was delayed. He did get clearance. He got clearance from the DOD, that particular office, to talk about this. And yet there's contradictions, because I've seen a few headlines where the Pentagon is not backing this whatsoever. And yet this whole apparatus has given him clearance. So there's some kind of contradiction going on here on the inside. Laura, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, there are these sort of inside wars or battles, white hats, black hats, just there's positive military, and then there's just sort of the mind-controlled military. And then how all that relates to secret space programs, and then just much larger picture of, alien agendas, negative alien agendas, controller groups. I mean, it's so multi-leveled, and there's so much compartmentalism, and then there's ways for some of these doors to open up between the compartments. And I think that's what's kind of happening. I mean, so much has already been exposed. So many whistleblowers have come out. Some whistleblowers haven't maybe been able to reveal certain things, but we've been connecting a lot of dots with all of this. I feel that they have been watching the disclosure community. They've tried to infiltrate it, and they've done a pretty good job in some cases, but not completely and totally, right? We see all of that. I feel like this is mimicking what we've seen so many times. Now it's a news story. And when you see things like school shootings or psyops or, kind of false flags, that kind of came up for me too. As far as, that could be a possibility. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. As far as your question about the, inner battles, or what was the question? It was just about this particular person coming forward and
right.
How
the
that was even allowed. It's a contradiction. Yeah, I mean,
no comment from the White House, by the way.
What's in charge of what? Even the dark technologies or the good tech. It's dark if it's in the wrong hands. It can be beneficial technology if it's in the right hands. So I think with so much being exposed, the fact that Trump was able to be in office for as long as he was, and that there is white hat forces and military, and even Eisenhower signed an executive agreement saying that certain individuals that are part of these particular sections of military are going to be legally allowed to come forward, that nobody can dispute it when it's time to speak. And that was a part of the USMC special section, U.S. Marine Corps special section connected to ET groups. And so this is the kind of stuff that I've heard that Randy Kramer talked about when I first met him, that it was going to be legally acceptable, so that national security, how they say this is a threat to national security and they're going to get you in trouble for it, that wouldn't be allowed. And that's why I think this is a similar case, if not connected to the same thing I'm talking about, where a doorway was able to be opened because there's no longer that threat of national security being something that could cover a person like him up. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Was it your great grandfather that signed that into motion?
Yeah, that's what Randy Kramer's saying
initially.
About this. Yeah, it was Ike's Force USMC special section, which is different than it's connected to the White Hats, but it's the positive military forces connected to the secret space programs. Mars Defense Force is what Randy was a part of. Right. And that there would be a time where if things got too far in this particular window that we're in, because these were the dates, that it was signed into executive order that you would be able to speak and not have the national security cover. Yeah. And I'll get that information before we close. You guys like move on. I'll find it, and like maybe when we
That would be
close,
great.
I can just read it.
That would be great. That would be great. I'm familiar relatively with what you're talking about, but I think I had also heard that it was an update or an amendment to that particular protection that gave even a thicker, veneer of protection for Grusch and people that that will come forward. And I'm hearing that there are a few more right behind him that are, getting ready to come out and corroborate what he said and with more detail.
Yeah, and I bet Reagan and others, did things too behind the scenes to make some of this possible, because they were trying to expose stuff. And
yeah. Michael Salla gave a nice piece to Redacted. Are you guys familiar with that YouTube channel? It's quite good. I like the way they report. And he, among other things, mentioned that, when he was asked what the motivation might be for this whistleblower report or whistleblower coming forward and why now, he said that that Grusch may be representing a faction that wants us to become aware of this, or he may be part of a setup, literally a false flag and a limited hangout. So, we're all look, that's on our radar. And my understanding is that more lay people are even starting to, we're in a cynical time right now. So good news, bad news. Good news, it's becoming a part of the public discourse, I hope. Bad news is what the motivation is. And good news, let's become aware of whatever it is. Could it be the beings themselves?
That's a third factor. But I like what Dr. Salla said, that perhaps this is the white hats bringing forth David Grusch and putting him on the stage. And he's a reluctant messiah. He said, I didn't even want my name out there, but I've been put up to this task to get this information out there. And isn't it interesting that the mainstream media wouldn't touch this story? To me, this is the biggest revelation probably in the history of modern humanity. And
well, that's an interesting thing. I heard that the New York Times passed on it, and who was the other major outlet? I can't remember. I think somebody told me at the conference that the Post passed on it, and they inevitably gave it to the Debrief. Kudos to the Debrief. This is a relatively new outlet. They've gained a lot of traction. MJ Banias and Tim McMillan and Micah Hanks and Leslie Keene and Ralph Blumenthal, of course, worked very, very closely with them. And I heard they did meticulous research, dotting I's and crossing T's before this story finally came out. So whatever the motivation is, this was well orchestrated for good or not. It was, I don't want to use the word orchestrated. It was well methodically done. So.
And the timing too was methodically done.
Yeah, I think they always are. Look, you guys, and I'm talking to the journeyers and I'm talking to my crew right here, Brad and Laura. Let's go back to the balloon situation, which, by the way, that so-called spy balloon was over my house before they showed up. Oh, yeah, we saw it. My neighbor rang my bell and said, Alexis, there's a UFO out here. It ended up being this object, which they invariably shot down off the coast of South Carolina. So yeah, we saw it. It was over our neighborhood for a good hour. Anyway, you had that. And that was what, February? Was that February, I think?
Earlier this year.
I can't remember.
I think it was, because I remember
early.
Yeah, because I was at AlienCon the next month. Interestingly, there were a few of those though, the objects shot down, which the media were calling slip of the tongue. I don't think so. UFOs or UAPs. They were starting to couch them in that light. So you had that. Fast forward to a couple weeks ago, the NASA panel. You got the Las Vegas thing going on, and now this. Within the span of three or so months.
Yep. And isn't it interesting that the media did pick up on the Chinese balloon?
Oh, sure.
I was talking on interviews at the time when that happened, and they did pick up on shooting down UFOs. To me, I'm thinking, are you kidding me? You don't just shoot down UFOs all of a sudden out of nowhere. Shooting down means using rockets or bullets. These craft, if they're real UFOs, have a force field that cannot be penetrated by our military weapons. So that right there, to me, spoke of disinformation on this story. But again, I think we're being set up. I think we're being primed for a much bigger operation. Laura brought up false flag operations. That's what Project Bluebeam is. It's the ultimate false flag operation to usher in this New World Order agenda. Werner von Braun even said so, that this would be the last play that they would do before ushering it in. And maybe we can break it down what the steps are leading up to Project Bluebeam when we go over to the Patreon page, because it's really important that people understand that we're already seeing these opening salvos of what is going to happen if they announce this Bluebeam alien invasion.
Thank you for bringing that up, Brad, my my buddy. We are indeed going to finish up this conversation over on Patreon. I definitely urge you to join us over there. Support Higher Journeys, of course, but come on over because we can get a little bit more granular over there. We're going to go over in about 10-15 minutes or so. Excellent point. And you, of all people, you're well researched in this area, Brad, and I really want you to go into, a lot of people that are aware of Project Bluebeam, myself included, before I read your book, thought of it as a more of an isolated event, as a false alien invasion and nothing more, but it's really part of a comprehensive plan that would include what you call the space show.
Yeah.
Religions come into play and perhaps false messiahs, but the bottom line is a simulated, a holographic reality of which we may be living in anyway, guys. That's the other thing. Could this whole thing be a universal holographic reality? Laura, let's get into the question I had about, could the term now is non-human intelligence, what I've been referring to as NHI for years, what if they are really the ones pulling the strings here, including the agenda? Some of them, the they is huge, as we know. Give me your thoughts on that. You've delved deep into the experiential aspect.
Right. Well, the they pulling the strings. A lot of people say, oh, the Greys are not here anymore. And if that's the case, well, they are able to create Greys and underground bases and engineer, just like they can back engineer a UFO craft. They can also, what I've come to know, is clone and create just beings that are Greys or EBEs that are not coming from like Rigel or Beetlejuice or, just like we hear about the Zetas and this and that they are actually just military operated, gray looking beings, right?
Sure.
So if it's under military control, that would be very much the false flag. So if that's leading into like a blue beam thing you guys were talking about, which, we've been talking about for a long time, very aware of this kind of thing. Also the holographic second coming of Jesus, right? So very much they monitor the vibration of the collective, or they're really looking at what would probably be the best based in what they think would be the greatest hook for the collective. Or maybe they decide to do different things at different locations depending on what they feel as they're sort of monitoring the consciousness levels through things like social media and also their technologies and satellites and things like that. So if it's the beings themselves, the darker agenda, the negative alien agenda, has already made and formed an alliance with a lot of these individuals. They don't even need to be the ones that are on the craft. They could be the ones that provided the technology to be able to create the clones, to create the false flag setup that, would be the fake part of it that is connected to them and off planet or underground, because they're off planet and underground and walking amongst us in hybrid form, that they would have provided the technology and helped with the strategizing behind, I think, this falseness. So I'm not saying for sure if these beings that people are witnessing now are not genuine beings, but it's important to consider that they might be automations or clones that were created by military forces that were guided and instructed by negative alien agenda beings like the Draco Alliance.
That makes a lot of sense. It reminds me of a conversation I had, interestingly, at Contact in the Desert, in 2018, with Linda Moulton Howe. If I can find a clip, maybe I'll splice it in, where I asked the question in terms of, her whole thing is really shouting out about the policies of lies and secrecy that have to stop. She's been doing, like many of us have, but she's been very outspoken in that regard. And I asked her the same question. Do you believe that the policies of lies and secrecy are being mandated by some of these negative entities, under the guise of a treatise that has been made? Who knows? And again, I'm going to see if I can find that. But yeah, I always ask that question, because if we are sharing space, both extra dimensionally and interdimensionally, with these beings, and they're far more advanced than us, and if they don't have the right motivation, or care for humanity, then they can do all of this. And like you said, through the human-ish individuals that are their sort of proxy. Wow.
I was on a panel with Randy Kramer. I was moderating the panel, and we brought up Project Bluebeam, and he said he was one of the military people that was going to be the spokesperson in a positive way of bringing forth Project Bluebeam. And that really shocked me. I said, how could this be positive if it's a false flag, if it's going to have casualties and destruction to do it? Because they will pull out all stops. They would not stop short of, say, 9/11. People really died and buildings were crushed and things like that. And so I was quite confused by the whole notion that this would be a good thing. And Randy said that they have to do it because our military has gained so much backward engineered technology in the form of our new craft, the TR-3B, the triangular craft, and so much more, that they would need this to exhibit all this flying craft that would combat this alien agenda. And I said, but okay, I guess I understand that they want to roll out this hardware and show the public in a way that, hey, we're the good guys here. We're helping out humanity. I said, well, what about the aliens? And he said that they would use the reptoids or these insectoids, and they have volunteered for this mission too. The insectoids, these mantis-like creatures, and they would get blown up. They would die. Big arms of mantids would come flying down
voluntarily.
To make it very real. And they would, but they're hive mentality species, so they can reproduce very rapidly. It's not a big deal to them. They realize that the soul gets reincarnated quite quickly, and that it wouldn't be a big deal for them to lose a whole bunch of their insectoid species for the purpose of using the Project Bluebeam as a disclosure to roll out all the hardware that has been kept up, bottled up in these black projects for many decades.
Wow. Y'all, we're getting deep here. This is a good time to give you a little cliffhanger, because we're going to shut it down on this side. We're going over there. Please join us, because I got some questions for you, Brad. We want to go deeper into Project Bluebeam. I have not heard in the last week any conversations. I think it's been mentioned once or twice. It's kind of become like a bad word, but we better be talking about it now. I want to talk more about Werner von Braun, as well as Carol Rosen, who we know some people that know her. She's still around, right? Carol Rosen. Oh yeah. Let's go over there and talk about that. We're gonna pick it up over there. So listen, you guys. I'm not gonna say closing thoughts because it's gonna continue, but really, really quick, Brad, what's going on with you right now? Laura, what's going on with you right now? For those that may not be joining us, so you can know what they're doing. Brad, what's happening?
Well, Laura and I are together right now in Portland, Oregon. We're working on her next book, her first book, which will be out this spring.
Awesome.
Awakening the Truth Frequency. We're putting together images, captions. I wrote a foreword to the book and putting some final touches on it, but we're going to get that put together. That's the immediate project I'm working on. I'm on my way to Mount Shasta the following weekend for the Mount Shasta Summer Conference, speaking there. And I'm working on a new book of my own. My 11th book called Esoteric Antarctica, bringing out all this good stuff and Operation High Jump. And of course, the Nazi influence down there and how it ties into the Fourth Reich in the Americas here.
Wow. And, no rest for the weary. Laura, well, he's already folded you in. I know what your plan is, to get out and talk about this book. obviously welcome back here to do so. When is it
Awesome.
expected out? When is it expected out?
I guess March, spring of next year. I'm really excited about that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, everything you can find out about what else is going on, you can just find on my website, cosmicgaia.org. Got some events coming up. But this is just really, I'm so excited about this. But yeah, events, I got a subscription thing. I continue to do readings, but it's just been wonderful to just be here with Brad. And I'm super pumped to get this book out.
Awesome.
And continue this fascinating conversation we're having. And
it is
so,
indeed. So let's do it. Let's do it, y'all. All right, everyone, signing off for the regular Higher Journeys. Come on over and join us. Patreon.com/Higher Journeys. We're going to get deeper. Come on over. We'll talk to you real soon. Bye. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to watch what's next, plus more to explore. And don't forget to subscribe to Higher Journeys.